They just want to hear the story. This couple goes on a fishing trip to northern Minnesota. The husband likes to fish, and the wife likes to read. So the husband takes the boat out and goes fishing, and later he comes back in and parks the boat and goes and takes a nap. The wife decides to take the boat out and go reading. She takes the boat out and anchors out in a cove somewhere, and she starts to read her book, and along comes the game warden and pulls up alongside the boat, and he says, "What are you doing, ma'am?" She says, "I'm reading," thinking, isn't it obvious? He says, "Well, you're in a restricted fishing area." She says, "Well, I'm not fishing, I'm reading." He says, "Well, that doesn't matter. I'm still going to have to write you up." She says, "Well, if you do that, I'm going to have to accuse you of sexual assault." But earlier he said, "I'm going to have to write you up and take you in. You have all the equipment there in the boat. You could start fishing at any time, right?" She says, "Well, if that's the case, I'm going to have to turn you in for sexual assault." He says, "But I haven't touched you." And she says, "Yes, but you have all the equipment." For all I know, you could start at any moment. Good day, ma'am. You never mess with a woman who reads. When we deal with marriages or husband and wife relationship, our whole ministry, On Target Ministries, is based on the idea of vision. In fact, my life verse is Philippians 3:13 and 14. And you're, of course, familiar with where Paul says, "Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal, the mark, the target." It's the idea that Paul had such a tremendous capacity to see God's purpose and God's vision for his life that nothing else mattered. And our whole approach to dealing with the human condition, whether we're dealing with individuals or with couples, or with institutions for that matter, is all about vision. The Bible said where there's no vision, the people... The NIV, which is the New Italian version, by the way, says where there's no revelation, the people cast off restraint. In other words, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. That's the idea. When I was in the business world, I was involved for a while with mergers and acquisitions. And of course, most people know what that means. You buy companies and you merge them together, and the idea is that they're better together than they were apart. What most people don't realize, however, is that most mergers are miserable failures. We put a lot of smoke and mirrors around them to make them look good, but they don't work oftentimes, and here's the reason why. Typically, it's because of management's either unwillingness sometimes or their inability to surface a new and bigger vision that eclipses the individual visions of the competing firms. So they never rise above where they were. Well, think of that same idea in the context of a man and a woman, two corporations, as it were, coming together. Your failure to see God's new and greater purpose for you united, oftentimes the reason for marital failure. Think of it this way. Michelangelo was asked once how he was able to carve these magnificent masterpieces. And he said, "I'm not sure how it works exactly, but I seem to be able to go over to the rock quarry. And even before they cultivate the marble out of the quarry, I see the vision of the beauty of the statue that I want to create." And then he said these words, "Once I catch the vision, the rest is quite simple. I just chip away what doesn't belong." And I thought, wow, what a powerful illustration. Guys, today, there's a lot wrong with the human condition. And secular psychology and the world doesn't have an answer for the human condition, never has and never will. The Bible does. We tend to throw drugs and psychobabble at people and think that's going to fix them, and it's not doing any good. What you really need is God and God's vision for your life. And so that's the whole idea behind what we do. I wrote a book. It's only available if you go to Amazon, I think, right now. I'm getting ready to reintroduce it. It's called Wired to Work, Answering the Two Most Important Questions in Life. If you Google Wired to Work on Amazon or go to Amazon, it's available there electronically, or I think maybe paperback too. But that book deals with this whole aspect of the incredible importance of wisdom, or vision. So, when we're talking about now the differences between men and women, we have to understand our differences in order for us to be able to begin to move on and catch God's vision for our life. So we differ in at least 4 different areas. And here they are. The first place where we differ is in our past life experiences. Okay, our past life experiences. The second area where we differ is our physiological difference, our makeup. How many of you know we're different? Men and women, no matter what the world says, men and women are biologically different. So physiologically, we're different. The third area is our fallen nature, which is really a profound teaching that's the centerpiece of what you're going to hear. And then the fourth area is our natural gifts. Now, just let me say this. If you're here and you'd like to be able to take the gift test, you can do it with your spouse independently for free if you go to our website. And I'll just give you that. It's OTM. That stands for On Target Ministries. OTM.co. That's it. Not com, just co. If you go to that website, I think it's under one of the tabs up on top, I think it's under On Target Institute, you'll see Gift Test. You can click on it, and you can go through and take it, drop down boxes, you can score it, it gives you a total, and it even gives you a report. So you're welcome to go and do that. But the first area is our past life experiences. Okay, everybody fold your hands. All over the auditorium, fold your hands. Now, I want you to notice how you have folded your hands. You can look up at me for a moment, and you can see I fold my hands with the right hand first finger on top. See that? Now, if you fold your hands with your right hand first finger on top, keep them folded and raise them. Now, if you look around the auditorium, you're going to see that 50% of the people right now fold your hands that way. It works out mathematically every time we do this. 50% of you, almost exactly, fold your hands that way. The rest of you fold your hands with your left hand, first finger on top. Reverse it. How does that feel? Huh? You know what we just discovered? Those other guys are Pentecostal. You know why you fold your hands that way? You don't know why. The fact of the matter is nobody knows why. You see, it has nothing to do with being right-handed, left-handed, nothing to do with being male, female, right brain, left brain, Italian, or just ordinary. It has to do with the fact that when you were little boys and you saw mom and dad fold their hands one day, whatever way your hands came together that first time, you formed what is commonly referred to as a habit. Nothing more complex than that. Now, I'm sure you realize that is a relatively safe unconscious habit. But how many of you know that there are a lot of other not so safe unconscious habits that we form, and sometimes we're not even aware of it? And so let me give you an example. When I was growing up, my dad, they would call him, I can't say it here, but a BS artist. He was a good guy, but he could sling it, man. I mean, he could come up with stories, and he'd have people believe in all kinds of weird stuff, and he was a form over substance kind of guy. He was the kind of guy that he'd say to my mom, hey, you know what? I told you I loved you at the wedding. If I ever change my mind, I'll let you know. I mean, he was a real sensitive guy that way. Anytime he would ever get into trouble, he would buy my mom stuff. He would buy her stuff. I came home one day, I was a kid, and it was a brand new car in the driveway with a big bow on it. I thought, man, I wonder what he did, And so he would just get into trouble like that all the time. So when I got married, Cindy, my wife, is the first person in the history of my family that wasn't Italian. I shared that with you guys, and so her family, very, very different, very soft and lovey, huggy, and all that. My family, very loud, demonstrative. So I had all these patterns, and how many of you know we picked this stuff up from our dads or important people in our life, and we don't even know what's happening, and I brought that pattern into our early relationship. And how many of you know that even though it's unconscious, you don't know about it, it can become a source of real irritation? Because she needed something I was not able to provide at that point. I didn't even recognize it. Same thing with her. She grew up with a dad that was an engineer. In fact, her dad used to tour with Bob Hope. They would go all over the world, and Bob Hope would visit all the military bases, and go and do his show. And so, but her dad was a perfectionist. Everything had to be just perfect. And so that's what happened with Cindy. She was a perfectionist. And I didn't know any of this. We were painting the room one day, the bedroom. And so I worked for a paint company back then. And we needed to paint the room, and I said, hey, I can paint the room, well, let's go get the paint. And we got the paint, and I'm painting the door trim, around the door. And Cindy comes over, and she starts looking at it. And she said, well, what's that? I said, what do you mean, what's that? It's the paint there. She says, there's brush marks. Well, of course, I'm using a brush. Yeah, she says, no. They're the brush marks, and they're not going away. They're staying brush marks. I said, well, what are you talking about? And we got in this huge fight. I mean, I slammed the paint back in the garage. That room sat unpainted for a year until we could afford to hire a painter to come paint it because she was such a perfectionist. Well, you're already probably thinking of some of the things maybe that exist in your relationship because as a result of the way we are raised, and those are just silly little examples, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Our past life experiences can be profound. We need to know about it, and we need to understand them, not beat each other up with them in any of these areas, but at least understand them. The second area has to do with our physiological differences. Now, physiologically, there are probably 100 different items in our physical bodies that differ between men and women. I mean, we don't have time to go all through them. Did you know there's over 1 million more red blood cells in a drop of a man's blood than there is with women? Underneath the top layer of skin in women, there's a thin fatty layer that exists. The result of that is their skin is soft and supple, whereas ours is more coarse. Again, this is just a couple, but the most profound difference happens in the brain. We don't know why this happens, but at around the 6-week mark, the brain of a little male child, there's a chemical wash that goes over the brain. We don't know why it happens, but it does. It's called testosterone. And what it does, it has the effect of deteriorating the connecting fibers between the right and left hemisphere of a male brain. It doesn't destroy them, it just deteriorates them. And as a result of that, men tend to think more compartmentally. We tend to think with one side of our brain at a time. A man can walk into a room, for instance, and experience that room. He can leave the room, shut the door, and go into an entirely different room and experience that room totally independent of the room that he was just in. Not so with our ladies. Everything kind of flows together like a river for them. It's just not the same. So when a woman asks a man, how does that make you feel? I might need a couple of weeks to think about it, I mean, we're just not, well, think of it this way. Women have this incredibly thick network of wires and conduits and transistors and electronic gadgetry wiring both sides of their brain. With us guys, it's kind of like 2 paper cups and a string, man. Hello, anybody home? I was at a friend's house in San Diego. And I was staying there, and I saved a lot of money because I didn't have to have a hotel room, right? So I got home, and I told Cindy, wow, it was great. I didn't have to buy a hotel. They let me stay at their house. She said, wow, that's wonderful. Maybe we should send them a card. I said, great, let's send them a card. She said, well, maybe we should send them a gift. I said, great, let's send them a gift. She says, what are their colors? Honey, I think they're both white. What color is the carpet? How many of you guys look at the carpet? We don't understand the carpet. So the whole idea is that we think differently. Gary Smalley used to talk about this years ago, and he would say, a woman needs 12 meaningful, non-sexual touches every single day. I mean, to us guys, that's a scary thought, okay? So what us guys want to, I tried this one time, went up to my wife and went, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. No. They have to be, I mean, yeah, that doesn't work real well. So women shop, men hunt. We don't shop for stuff. We know what we want. We get in there and we get it and we get out. So it's different. We're wired totally differently. We think differently. My wife, when we're teaching on this, she oftentimes used the story of David and Bathsheba out of the Bible, where she can prove that what happens, not all the time, but oftentimes, is men tend to think more on the logical side and women tend to think more on the emotional side. And so we can get into trouble sometimes if we don't understand those differences about each other. So, we are wired differently. And the third area has to do with our fallen nature. Now, this is the critical area. This is very, very important. Normally, we would have a handout for you, but we do have one for the event tomorrow. But it has to do with the different needs and fears of men and women. If you go all the way back to the garden, you can see what has happened. Now, Adam and Eve had it made, did they not? I mean, they lived in a beautiful place. They walked and talked with God. They were able to relate to all the animals. They had an abundance and variety of food. They had no in-laws. And the Bible says, and on top of that, they were naked. By the way, I took the liberty of looking up naked, the original translation of the word naked. Do you know what the original word naked translates into? Naked. Just thought you needed to know that. But anyway, so they had it made, and then sin came, and as a result of that, God brought a curse, not on the man and the woman, but he brought a curse into their world. And so in Genesis, the curse on the man was that he was going to work by the sweat of his brow. He was going to work hard to have to produce fruit. How many of you know work was the concept of work is pre-fall? It didn't happen as a result of sin, because God is a worker, and he created Adam and Eve to tend the garden, to bring it to fruition, okay? So it was pre-fall. But now, as a result of sin, the work was going to be tough. It's going to be by the sweat of your brow. For dust you were, and to dust you'll return. As a result of that curse, ever since the fall, men have been trying to overcome the curse. And so our greatest fear is failure. Our greatest need is significance. Fear, failure, we need significance. A man wants to be able to know that he has a legacy, that something has happened. He can step back from it and say, wow, look at what I've been able to do. We desire that. Okay, now, when a man feels like he's hitting on all cylinders and he feels like he's really significant, he is fun to be with, very communicative, and it's just a joy to be around. But when a man feels like a failure, it's totally the opposite. When a man feels like a failure, his tendency is to withdraw, want to hide out, want to veg, doesn't want to talk to anybody, gets very quiet. So our reaction to our needs and fears can be very, very different. Now, that's for the man. Let's go over to the woman. The curse there was, among other things, like pain and childbearing. But here's the important part. To the woman, he said, listen, you will desire your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, very careful here, gentlemen. That does not mean lord it over. What it literally means is that a woman will desire this man to be in a position of authority and a place of safety, a place of security, a covering for her. A woman's greatest need is for security. Her greatest fear is abandonment. And listen, gentlemen, abandonment doesn't mean getting in the car and driving away, although that certainly qualifies. Abandonment could be something as simple as looking at your electronic device or playing a game on your phone while she's trying to talk to you. That's abandonment to a woman. Now, here's the difference in how a woman reacts to her fears and needs. When a woman's needs are being met, she's a joy to be around. Very helpful. She's very encouraging, which men need. We need to be significant. We're like little golden retriever puppies, man. We want pats on the head, and we just, it's just great. Okay, but when a woman is feeling like her needs are being met, she is encouraging to us. I mean, when it comes to intimacy, it makes a whole different. How many of you discovered that? I mean, the whole intimacy thing just blossoms. Okay, so she's really cool. But when she's fearful, and she feels like she's being abandoned, a woman doesn't withdraw. She attacks. She becomes more critical. She really is aggressive, okay? So, let me define some of your relationships right now. When a man feels like a failure, what does he do? He withdraws, right? When a man withdraws, what does a woman feel like? Abandoned. When a woman feels abandoned, what does she do? Attacks. When a woman attacks a man, what does he feel like? Failure. When he feels like a failure, what does he do? How long do you want me to do this? Some of you are recognizing what I'm talking about because it happens a lot. And in our relationship, we still have to really, look, a sign of spiritual maturity in a relationship is when you recognize this pattern is going on and you deliberately do something to break it. And whose job is it to do that, really, guys? It's ours. Now, that doesn't mean a woman can't do it. In fact, it wasn't that long ago, Cindy and I were in that mode, okay? And she's the one said, honey, you realize what's happening here. And immediately, I'll tell you something, guys. It's a lot easier to teach this stuff than it is to do it. You know what I mean. It really is. You really have to pay attention. And so we grabbed hands and we prayed through it and we got through it and it was fine. But I mean, it's very, very important that you recognize it. In Timothy, the place where Paul says women should be quiet in the church. Not a lot of pastors like to preach on that verse, but it's because of a misunderstanding of what Paul was really saying. Paul was not saying, women, shut up, you got nothing to contribute. That's not what he was saying. The word quiet is translated hesushia. It's translated 4 times in that flow of text, and hesushia literally means to step back and live quiet and orderly lives. That's what the word means. What Paul was recognizing is a woman's nature to fill the void left behind by men that aren't doing their job. I want to tell you something, guys. Thank God for women in my country because the church wouldn't be there without them. Men abandon their responsibility to be the heads of their homes spiritually and spiritually heads of our churches. And a woman will fill the vacuum if we're not doing it. And so Paul was acknowledging a woman's natural inclination to be critical, to fill and take over. And he was saying, step back, ladies, and live quiet and orderly lives. Listen, and pray for and encourage your men to step forward and take their rightful position of authority and spiritual covering in the home and in your family. That's what Paul was really trying to say. And when we do studies, by the way, where we talk to women, most women would say that they're passionate about this. Most women would say we're desperate for our men, you and I, to become the spiritual head of our home. There's nothing a woman desires more that is a believer than for us to step up and be the spiritual head of our home. You guys have heard my story. I mean, when I first came to the Lord, I wasn't mature enough to really do that. But my wife just kept encouraging me. And in fact, I was intimidated. Some of you guys know what I mean. Your wives are further ahead than you are. And that's okay. We need to still step forward and practice and do it because they love it when they see us getting serious about being spiritual heads of our home. So the idea here is, let me kind of drill this home by demonstrating this. I need someone, come on, I want you, let's just pretend, I'll just keep picking on Grant. Grant here, pretend like Grant is my wife. Okay, Cindy. So we get away from me, my wife. And so my wife comes to me, and we have these 2 rocks here. This is her need for security and my need for significance. You notice that a woman, by the way, picked out these rocks, and you can see the little rock is significance, and the big rock is we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so this is her need. We decided to get married. This is her need for significance or security. My need for significance. So. You really do make an ugly woman. But anyway, so we decide to get married. All right, so what happens is she decides to trust me, watch this, with her need for security, and I decide to trust her with her need, my need for significance. So when we do this in a live setting with Cindy and I, Cindy keeps on talking, and now the audience knows I've got her need for security in my hands here, and so I start kind of playing with it and bouncing it around, and it falls on the ground, and then Cindy says, and pretty soon I realize that this man is not taking my need for security very, very, very seriously, and so what she does is she grabs it back, and then I grab my need for significance back, and then she keeps on talking, and I start, and then I'll usually wander over to a front row where there's a woman sitting, and I'll start to hand it to her. Come on, what am I doing? What am I doing? At the end of the day, I got to have this need met, man. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It could be porn. Oftentimes it is. It could be, sometimes we even justify porn as it's better than an affair. I want to tell you something. To a woman, it's not better than an affair. It isn't. It's so violating. But I've got to have this need met. And the same thing can happen with her. She needs to have her need for security met. And if I'm not going to meet it, it's going to get met somewhere. It may be a disproportionate amount of time and attention given to kids or worldly possessions, or it could be an affair. Now listen, if the whole thing started with a curse, guys, who's the only one that can redeem a curse? Say his name. Jesus. Say it again. Jesus. You and I, as husbands and wives, were never meant to have our needs met on a lateral plane. We were meant to have our needs met by who? God. You've seen the triangle. God at the top, man, woman. As we get the flow going right with our Creator, with God, as we worship Him and He begins to cover us and we get our significance and our security from Him, then He uniquely enables us to have our needs met on this level. That's the way it was designed to work. With me, is when Cindy realized that and she finally got to a point where she just decided she needed to let me go, man, it changed everything. It changed everything. And I was God even spoke to her and says, Cindy, he's in my hands. Just leave him alone. And it made such a difference. Guys, we can't change a hair on each other's heads. It just can't be done. We just have to focus on who? Jesus and what He can do in our life. The fourth area has to do with our natural gifts. I don't have time to really unpack this, but let me just give you a brief overview because we do a much more in-depth job and a much more fun job when we do the seminar, if you're able to come tomorrow night. But there are a lot of gifts that are referred to in the Bible, but there's a lot of confusion about gifts. I've got a lot of friends in the States that have these elaborate gift tests that they put together, and they lump all of them together, and it takes 2 or 3 hours to take the test. And I don't believe you can make a theological case for all the gifts in the Bible being lumped together because I think they're distinctly different. In fact, I believe there are 3 categories of gifts that are referred to in the Bible. Let's see if this makes sense to you. The first category are what we call spiritual or power gifts. Those gifts are found in 1 Corinthians 12, 8 to 10. And of course, we know that those are the gifts that are the most controversial in the body of Christ. They have to do with miracles and power and healing and all that stuff. And, there are some people that believe those gifts died out. They're no longer operational today. And there are others who believe, no, they are operational. We have signs and wonders, and we see it all the time. I want to make it very clear, those are not the gifts that I'm referring to. There are some that would say those are dispensational gifts, and they're given by, in this case, given by the Holy Spirit for power and all that kind of stuff within the body of Christ. They're not the gifts we're referring to. The second category of gifts are oftentimes referred to as the ministry or service gifts, in this case, given by the Son, and they're found in Ephesians 4, 11 and 12, and 1 Corinthians 12, 28. And again, like the first category, those are gifts that many people believe died out, and some people believe are still operational. Again, these are not the gifts that we're referring to. So you can take a big theological sigh of relief. We're not going to go there. So it's perfectly okay for you to be wrong about how you feel about all those gifts. The third area are what we call the 7, and in the Bible, the number 7 indicates completeness or wholeness, the idea that 7 means the totality of everything. The 7 personal, natural, motivational, sometimes referred to as charismata gifts that are found in Romans 12, 1 to 8. Here they are: perceiver, ministry, teaching, exhorting, giving, administration, and mercy. How many of you have taken a gift test on the 7 natural gifts? Anybody? A few of you. Have you ever heard of temperament analysis? I remember years ago, Florence Littauer had the melancholy, the caloric kind of a temperament analysis. Gary Smalley years ago used to have the lion, the otter, the beaver. There's all kinds of different temperament analysis that help us look at behavioral characteristics and line us up with certain personality types. Well, I happen to think temperament analysis has been in the Bible all along. And they're found in these 7 gifts. In fact, I developed this test from another author years ago. Focus on the Family actually sent people to validate the test scientifically, and to this day, they still send people to our website to take the test online. So I used to use the test, by the way, in the business world to make sure I'm not putting square pegs in round holes. So again, perceiver is sometimes referred to as prophetic. It does not mean prophetic in this context in the sense of foretelling. It means people that are wired to be perceptive, discerning, can cut to the chase, get through a lot of different ideas and really come up with the highest and best, the 80-20 rule kind of people. Perceiver. Ministry, sometimes referred to as the gift of helps. Teaching, exhorting, sometimes referred to as encourager. Giving, administration, sometimes referred to as management, and mercy. Now again, I don't have time to unpack them all, but I'm going to give you some generalities. You never give a mercy person a project to do. Why? It'll never get done. At the same time, you don't want to give administrator types hospital visitations. Say, man, get up, get out of here. There's nothing wrong with you. They have no empathy for people. But you might want the administrator to lead the mercy people in the hospital. Why? Because the mercy people are wandering around the hallways. They don't know where they are. And the administrator's got the clipboard. Oh, have you been to Mrs. Jones's room? No, where is it? It's 4 doors down on the right. And they go. Okay? Now, is that a good or bad? No. Both are needed. But when we sometimes try to do things that are not in our natural area of giftedness is where we get into trouble. Both are needed. Let me give you another example. If all of a sudden something happened in this room and there's an explosion and the room fills with smoke and there's fire, people are lying on the floor, some people are injured. If you're lying on the floor and you're injured, who do you want next to you? You want the ministry or mercy people. They have empathy for you. You know, you don't want the perceiver. You know, the perceiver doesn't care about you. What does he care about? He's trying to figure out how to get out of this room. He's looking around. Where's the light coming from? What's the highest and best use of an exit route? And he's calculating all this. The mercy people, they may not know how to get out of the room, but they can take care of you. How many of you know you need both, not just one? And again, a sign of spiritual maturity in a relationship is when you recognize that because of the way you're wired, you tend to look at life through 2 different filters. When we do the gift test, it's hysterical because we get feedback from the husbands and wives about how they scored on their test. And it's really funny. Some people score the complete opposites. And then they wonder why we look at the same situation in life and we see it in completely different ways. Some people are wired very similar and they see it in the same way. But again, understanding these differences is really critical. Let me give you a little thing that I did in a marriage class one time that would best probably put this all together. We took the test and we're all done. And I said to the class, I said, I want you to imagine that you and your spouse are in a grocery store, a market, you're shopping. And down one of the aisles, you spot a little boy. His name is Johnny. You don't really know much about Johnny other than he just moved down the street with his mom and dad. You know, they seem friendly enough. They wave when they walk by and smile, you know. And Johnny's only about 10 years old. And so you made some observations. They don't drive a very nice car. Their yard's not very well kept. They don't seem like they have a lot of money. That's all you know. You're watching Johnny, and he doesn't see you, but you see him. He moves over to a table, kind of sheepishly, grabs an item off the shelf, sticks it in his pocket. And as you're watching him, he makes his way over to the door, and he leaves the store without having paid for the item. What would you do? That was my question. Now, some of you right now are thinking about what you would do. We don't have time to do this, but if we did, I could probably prove to you that your response to that one scene is directly born out of the way God wired you. Now, watch this. I asked the question, and one guy sitting way in the back raises his hand. I said, what would you do? He says, I'd turn that kid in right now. His wife, sitting right next to him, and I'm not exaggerating, took her elbow and shoved it into this guy's ribs that he jumped off the seat and he said, whoa, what are you doing? What are you talking about? What would you do? I'd turn him in. What would you do? I'd pray for him. Pray for him. Give me a break. They got in this huge fight right in the middle of the class. Okay, and so we went around the room. until we went around to everybody, and we were able we came up with 30 different responses to that same illustration, okay? So now watch this. Here's what we typically do. Okay, I need help in what I should do about the situation. So I come over here and I say, okay, what would you do? And let's say he's got a gift of teaching. Well, actually, my dad had this gift too. Teachers like to create environments within which people will discover and learn. That's the natural kind of thing for a teacher, to express truth based out of their own life, all that kind of stuff. So, in fact, my dad, I was a 10-year-old boy, and I went to a drugstore one day, and I stole a candy bar, Three Musketeers candy bar, you know, my favorite. I took it home, and my dad knew I couldn't pay for that, and he saw it. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, I had to admit, I stole it. He said, "Son, this is very serious. We could lose you." I said, "What? Lose me? What do you mean, Dad? They could take you away. We not be able to keep you. You have to confess." I said, "What?" "Yeah." He called an off-duty cop, friend of his. Okay? And he called a store manager. He set this whole thing up. And he says, "We got to go." And he takes me over there. And the policeman is standing there in full uniform, and the manager is standing next to him. The cop car's there, man, with the red lights going. And they take me up and they handcuffed me, man. And they took me back into the office in the back. Do you think I ever stole another candy bar? I can't even look at a Three Musketeers candy bar. I mean, that's what my teacher would do, stuff like that. So I say, "Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your advice." So I come over here, and let's say he has the gift of ministry or mercy. So I say, "What would you do?" And he says, "Well, I don't think I'd do much. I'd certainly pray for them, maybe get to know them, love on them, buy them a bag of groceries, whatever. That's what I do." And I say, "Thank you very much." Now watch what I'm doing. Watch what I'm doing. "Thank you very much." What am I doing? I don't like that one. I come over here, and let's say he's perceiver, admin, hardwired guy, just like me. I say, "What would you do?" He said, "I'd turn that kid in a New York minute." What am I doing? I am simply walking through life until I find somebody that's wired just like me to affirm that my way is the right way. And that, gentlemen, is where we get into trouble. The Bible is the tiebreaker. That's the rule book. The way you discover God's wired you is not an excuse for you to be the way you are. Kind of like, "Hey, Cindy, I went and took this gift test with this D'Acchioli guy, and the reason why I'm so hard and cold and shallow sometimes and not very kind toward you is I just discovered that's the way God wired me. You're going to have to live with it." Yeah. It doesn't work well. I tried it. Any more than she can come to me and say, "The reason I float through life and I never count the cost and all that stuff." No. Come on, guys. The Bible says we're to be kind and compassionate to one another. All it means is if you're not inclined that way or wired that way, it's not an excuse for you not to try. It's not an excuse for you not to line up to the standard the Bible brings. In the same way, the Bible says that we need to count the cost. We need to be shrewd. All those kinds of things. If you're not wired that way, you need to find help and find ways to live up to that. So that's kind of the idea, guys. And when you discover by taking that gift test how you're wired differently, it'll be revelational in terms of the way you view life and the way you make decisions in life. Does that sound okay? Okay. Now, these guys are flashing cards at me because when is this workshop over? It's over at discussion time now? Yep. Okay, so we're going to go into a discussion time. If any of you guys want to learn more about this, you can come to the other one tomorrow night or see me afterwards, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have. And I apologize that I couldn't unpack more, but does that help? Okay, go. You're going to...
Okay, guys, what we're going to do now, we're going to have a question and answer time. We've only got a few minutes to do it. So me and Pete are going to be walking around the auditorium. If you put your hand up if you want to answer a question, and could you just be short and sweet so everyone can get a turn who wants to talk. Thanks.
Oh, we're going to do a question and answer thing?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I didn't know we were doing that. I thought we were doing discussion stuff. Okay. Yes.
So, Vince, you find that some people are multi-type personalities because there's, some people that they call
I can't hear.
chameleons who are 3 or 4 different types of personalities or equal in each box. personality types I'm talking. So some people are more than one personality
Yeah,
than
what
another.
happens with the gift test is typically what we do is we have you find your top 2 scores. And that helps define kind of how you're wired. So for instance, your top score could be maybe you're a perceiver, perceptive person, and maybe your second would be like admin, very organized, very, people that are hardwired, that's kind of on the hard side, very sequential, very logical, very organized. Or your gift might be ministry as your first one, and mercy, more of a soft-sided person. The soft-sided people tend to be a lot better relationally. They're more comfortable, easy to be with. They're not quite as organized. That's why they need to have other people in their life that would help with that. But again, our tendency is because we don't understand each other when we're that separated, we beat each other up with it instead of allowing each other to be to complement each other. Just real quick, my wife and I were at an event, and after the event we spoke at, the founder of the ministry's wife at dinner asked me a question. And so when she was asking me the question, I immediately thought, I can't answer this question. I deflected it to Cindy. And then she answered the question. And we're all 3 of us watching her, and it was like, whoa. I mean, the stuff that was coming out of her, it was blowing us away. And I'm thinking, man, am I glad I didn't answer that question. I mean, she would have blown me away. And so and afterward, the guy mentioned that. He says, I noticed that you deflected that. Tell us about that. And I told him, I said, we're not perfect at this yet, but we're learning how to defer to each other because we intuitively know more and more about how we're wired. Does that make sense? So usually your second gift, your first and second gift will complement each other or affect the way you look at life as well. A person with the gift of giving, with a soft-sided gift, can say, hey, take this money and use it and be blessed. That's a same person with a gift of giving, with a hard-sided gift, an organizational gift, might say, hey, take this money and be blessed and give me an accounting for it at the end of the month. That's the difference. I mean, so a second gift can truly impact the way our first gift operates. But again, I'm so sorry we don't have a chance to really unpack this further and do that, but maybe we'll come back and do a full seminar here. If I can get my wife to come, that would be fun. Another one? Yeah.
This is a good one for you. I'm the only Christian in my family, and when I try to talk about God or Jesus, it creates conflict, and it's pretty rough, and I'm sick of it. I want it to change, and I pray, and nothing's happening. And my wife and I are so different, but she speaks the word of God. It just comes out of her mouth, but she just doesn't want to get with us Jesus freaks, it hurts, man. What can we do? Well,
So you're the only one who is a believer? Yeah. You can't do anything. No. But you have to get to a point where you're comfortable with that. There's an old poem. It says, as children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because he was my friend. But then instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last I snatched him back and cried, how can you be so slow? My child, he said, what could I do? You never did. Let go. And there's a powerful principle in this whole idea of letting go. And I can see how broken you are because your desire is for them to really experience the joy in their life that you have. But the very best thing you can do, look, even though intellectually you can't control any of this, how many of you know that even though we know we can't control something, there's still an anxiousness that wells up in us? And I don't know how this works, guys, but there's a spiritual principle here. And what God wants us to do is just get out of the way. Get out of the way and just focus on him. And increase your prayer life. Get closest to God as you possibly can. And just keep praying for these people. And then let the joy of God just fill your life and just wait on him. He is the only one. That's what Cindy had to do with me. I mean, she tried doing it. It took 8 years. You heard my testimony. It took 8 years. But the more she let go, the more God could work. Because trust me, everything you say, listen to me, all of you, listen to me. Well, if you're dealing with a situation like this and you've got unbelievers around you, everything you say, everything you do, a 1 millimeter eyebrow movement will be taken as manipulation. They're watching you because they already know that your perception is that so it's, whenever you're approaching them, you got to ask your question, what's my motive? That's why I wear this wristband. It's Proverbs 16:2 says, a man plans his ways, but the Lord understands the motives of the heart. Okay? What is my motive? Am I saying this or doing this to get them to see how important it is for them to ask Jesus in their heart? Because the minute they interpret it that way, they'll resist. So you just have to really, truly let go. And because God's big enough to do this. He doesn't need us. He uses us at the right time. But just stay close to him, man, and trust him, and it'll be okay. It may not happen the way you want it to happen. Honestly, guys, I am finding my proximity to God is in direct relation to my distance from Vince.
Yeah, I'll give him one.
Some of you had to think about that one. The closest I am to me and my concerns and my worries, the further I am away from him. The more I can relax and just say, Lord, at the end of the day, I don't have to, Jesus says, my peace I give you, not the world's peace. What is the difference? The world's peace, power, manipulation, and control. If I can just get these set of circumstances to exist, they might believe. I might get that promotion. I might not lose my job. My wife might think more highly of me. All these things, they'll bring about a temporary peace, albeit false. True peace, what Jesus is talking about, listen, men, it's counterintuitive. True peace can only come when you recognize how little you bring to the table. Why is that true peace? Well, think about it. I don't have to bring anything to the table. He is totally sufficient, and that's really what we're after. So I'm glad you asked that question, by the way, because it's a very important question. There's probably a lot of other men in here that are dealing with that as well. But does that make sense? Let him fill you with his joy, okay? And you just keep bringing these things to him. What was that loud? That was a horn.
Okay, guys, give a hand to Vince. Can you just get your workbooks out and write down a couple of things that Vince has talked about, what you need to go home and discuss with your wife?